Okay, let's unpack this. This big question. Why do we, ask God for forgiveness?
Right. And maybe even more, does it actually do anything? Are we really forgiven?
Exactly. It's such a fundamental human feeling, isn't it? That sense of having done wrong and wanting some kind of release, absolution.
It taps right into our ideas about right, wrong, and what happens next, consequences.
Totally. And today, on the deep dive, we're tackling this very question, but through a really quite unique lens. We've been digging into a spiritual discourse. This one's dated September 5th, 1925.
And it's interesting because it's not perhaps what you'd expect from a standard religious text.
No, not at all. The main idea really is that Shiva, who many know and revere, is presented as the ultimate father, the supreme father.
And crucially, that individuals that you can have a direct line, a direct connection to him.
Yes, that immediacy. It seems to cut out the middleman, so to speak.
It emphasizes that personal one-on-one relationship.
So for you listening, especially if you're someone who likes to really understand things and get those aha moments, this look at karma, forgiveness, the divine, it offers a genuinely fresh angle.
It really does. We need to sort of step outside the usual boxes for a bit.
Yeah, put aside the standard dogma maybe, because this source definitely has some, let's say, surprising takes on these huge questions.
It certainly does. So where should we start? Maybe with how the source actually describes Shiva.
Good idea. So the text keeps calling Shiva the highest on high father, not just a father, but the ultimate one, higher than us, higher than souls even.
And it stresses that God is incognito, doesn't have a physical body.
Right, which is a key point because it contrasts this with, say, gurus or sannyasis, people you can actually see.
People who, as the text notes, often get a lot of praise and devotion because they're visible, because they have bodies.
And that ties into offerings, doesn't it? The text says because Shiva doesn't have his own hands or feet, he doesn't directly take physical things like flowers.
Makes sense logically. How could he?
Yeah, it says he doesn't accept anything directly. It really shifts the focus from, perhaps, the purely ritualistic.
Suggests maybe a more internal kind of connection is what's important here.
Okay, so back to the main event, forgiveness. According to this 1925 discourse, why do people ask for it?
Well, the source points to this common belief, this fear, really. The idea that God, through Dhamraj, who's called the supreme judge,
Right, Dhamraj.
he will punish people for their sins, for their wrongdoings. That fear seems to be the main driver.
And this is where it gets really counterintuitive. Maybe the text says, even if you ask for forgiveness, God doesn't just hand out some medicine to wipe the slate clean.
Exactly. There's no magic pill to erase the consequences.
Instead, you face the suffering of karma. It's unavoidable.
So forgiveness in this context doesn't mean escaping the results of your actions.
It's more like cause and effect playing out.
Precisely. Karma as this inherent law. God doesn't intervene to stop the effects, according to this view. It's less about a pardon, more about the natural outcome.
And the way this consequence, this punishment happens, is described really specifically as being in the jail of a womb.
Yeah, that's a striking image. And while in that state, the text says individuals get visions of their past actions. They see what they did.
Wow. And this happens because they didn't follow God's directions, what the text calls shrimat.
That's the link, yes. Not following Shrimat leads to this experience. The suffering isn't just random. It's framed as a necessary part of the soul's journey to understand.
Which connects to that universal cry, liberate us from sorrow. People want to be free from suffering.
And this text suggests the path involves understanding these mechanics.
So following Shrimat, God's directions, is absolutely critical then. Avoids the punishment, leads towards, well, what?
Towards liberation, essentially. And the source highlights remembering the Father and becoming soul conscious.
Okay, soul conscious. What does that mean practically in this framework?
It's about shifting your identification, seeing yourself primarily as the soul, the eternal spiritual energy, rather than the temporary body or the ego.
Like realizing your true, deeper identity.
Exactly. Your identity as a spiritual being connected to the Supreme Father.
Now, this discourse, it really doesn't shy away from challenging some big established ideas, does it?
Not at all. It takes aim at common understandings of Scripture, especially something as central as the Bhagavad Gita.
Right. This was a big one. It flat out says that Shiva, not Krishna, is the god of the Gita.
Yes, that Shiva is the one giving the true knowledge, the Raja Yoga teaching found within it.
And it suggests Krishna's name got put in there almost by mistake, that his role is different.
That's the assertion. And it draws a distinction saying Sri Krishna isn't called the purifier, but Shiva is. The purifier is a key title for Shiva in this teaching.
That's a major reinterpretation. It really sets this perspective apart from mainstream Hinduism. Makes you think.
Definitely prompts a reconsideration of familiar stories and texts.
And this connects to another key idea, the importance of the present time.
Yes, the discourse insists that the highest on high Father is actually here, personally teaching Raja Yoga right now.
But, and here's the catch, only a few really recognize this is happening.
Which gives it this feeling of a unique, perhaps fleeting opportunity. Recognizing God's presence now, learning this yoga now, is presented as vital.
Vital for what? What's the goal?
Spiritual progress, ultimately leading to establishing a new era, a golden age. The text even uses terms like becoming emperors and empresses in that future state.
Okay, so becoming royalty, metaphorically or perhaps literally in this view. And how do you get there?
Through service and staying soul-conscious. That's the pathway emphasized.
And it contrasts the spiritual study and service with, like, regular worldly studies.
It does. It suggests that real lasting progress comes from this spiritual effort, from actively engaging in service.
What kind of service are we talking about?
It seems to mean more than just good deeds.
Yeah.
It implies sharing this specific spiritual knowledge, living by these principles, helping others connect with the Father.
And there's a consequence for not doing this service, too.
Yes. The text suggests those who don't engage might end up in a lesser role in that future golden age, maybe like maids or servants, a strong motivator perhaps.
It definitely links effort now with future status, and this whole path seems tied up with the idea of purity.
Yeah, absolutely. The source states the Father is detached from impurity, so for the soul to connect and progress, it needs to become pure.
Pure in what way? Thoughts, actions.
All of the above, it seems. Thoughts, words, actions. Becoming like deities is the goal mentioned.
And this involves getting rid of poison. What's the poison?
Negativity, vices, body consciousness, anything that pulls the soul down from its pure state. Renouncing that is key to becoming a resident of heaven.
Okay. And the discourse touches on rebirth too, right? The cycle.
It does. It specifically mentions a cycle of 84 births for a soul.
84. Not the millions sometimes mentioned.
Right. It clarifies that it's not 8.4 million births through different species. It's a cycle of 84 human births, according to this teaching. A more defined journey.
Interesting clarification. And finally, it makes some pretty bold claims challenging core beliefs.
Very bold. It calls the belief in God's omnipresence, that God is everywhere, the first lie.
Wow. That's fundamental for many. Why a lie? Does it explain?
The implication seems to be that God is a specific point, the Father, not diffused everywhere. Thinking he's everywhere prevents recognizing him when he comes personally.
I see the logic within this framework, and it also questions the idea of Hinduism itself.
Yeah, it suggests that Hinduism as this single unified religion is more of a later label, not how things were originally conceived. Another point that challenges conventional history.
Definitely a lot of unique perspectives packed in there. Okay, so let's try and boil this down. As we wrap up this deep dive into the 1925 discourse, what are the absolute key takeaways?
Well, first, I'd say that strong focus on the direct personal connection with Shiva the Father, that's central.
Right, no intermediaries needed.
Second, the understanding of karma. Consequences aren't really forgiven away. They're experienced as part of the soul's learning, suffering of karma.
Okay, cause and effect, not divine pardon.
Third, the very distinct interpretation of Scripture, like the Gita, and this idea that the current time is uniquely significant for learning Raja Yoga directly from the Father.
The now is critical.
And finally, the importance of sustained spiritual effort service, purity, soul consciousness for actual progress, and reaching that elevated future state.
Makes sense. So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If we accept this idea for a moment, that the consequences of our actions are inherent, baked in, and we experience them directly.
Without needing an external judge in the traditional sense.
Yeah. How does that shift your own feeling of personal responsibility? Does it make it heavier, clearer?
And how might it change how you think about living a meaningful life or pursuing spiritual growth, especially with this concept of a direct line to the divine?
It definitely challenges standard ideas about worship and maybe even guilt, doesn't it? Lots to think about.
Indeed.
We really hope this deep dive has given you some valuable food for thought and maybe a starting point for your own reflections on these profound concepts.